was reportedly set to vote to release its report on former Florida Congressman and Trump's new pick for Attorney General, Republican Matt Gaetz. For years now, the Ethics Committee has been investigating a string of allegations against Gaetz, the most serious being the allegation that he engaged in sexual misconduct with a 17-year-old girl, potentially violating sex trafficking laws. Gaetz denies these allegations, but this week, just hours after being chosen by Trump for Attorney General and just days before the Ethics Committee was set to potentially release its report, Gaetz resigned from Congress. And now Gaetz's Republican colleagues are saying that by resigning, Gaetz is no longer under the Ethics Committee's jurisdiction. And so its report, and whatever is in its report, should not see the light of day. It is all a very convenient series of events and excuses. However, the House Ethics Committee has released reports on lawmakers after they have resigned multiple times in the past. Precedent is not in Matt Gaetz's favor. But Republicans control the House, and so what this really is here is a test of party, not precedent.
As far as the timing of a release of a report or something, I don't know. The Speaker of the House is not involved in that, can't be involved in that, so I'm not really the person probably to answer that question.
Now, that was the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, on Wednesday, the day that Matt Gaetz resigned. Johnson's stance then was that as the Speaker of the House, he is not involved in Ethics Committee matters like this one. In fact, he cannot be involved. That was Mike Johnson's take on the matter Wednesday. And this is Mike Johnson's take on the matter today.
I believe it is very important to maintain the House's tradition of not issuing ethics reports on people who are no longer members of Congress. I think it would open a Pandora's box. I think it's a very important rule that should be maintained. If it's been broken once or twice, it should not have been, because that would be a Pandora's box.
Yes, the classic Pandora's box, a box that you can open several times without incident, but if you open it again, be careful. Or maybe don't be careful. Who can know? Not only is what Speaker Johnson describing here not a Pandora's box, it is also a full 180 degrees from his stance 2 days ago that he would not get involved in this issue at all. When asked today by the Washington Post if he would do anything to prevent the ethics report from being released, Johnson responded, "I'm going to request that it not be." That is pretty involved, if you ask me. So what changed? What did Mike Johnson do between Wednesday and today? Well, I want you to take a listen to Johnson's answer after his whole Pandora's box spiel.
It's a very important rule that should be maintained. If it's been broken once or twice, it should not have been, because that would be a Pandora's box. I think it's a very important tradition to maintain.
Did you talk to Trump about this?
I'm not talking to anybody about what I've said to Trump.
Yes, there we go. Last night, Mike Johnson spent the evening with Donald Trump at a gala down at Mar-a-Lago. Speaker Johnson doesn't want to talk about what he and Trump discussed, but somehow in the past 48 hours, Mike Johnson's stance on whether or not, as Speaker of the House, he should try and stop the ethics report about Matt Gaetz from being released, somehow in the past 48 hours, Mike Johnson's stance on that issue has completely reversed. I wonder how that happened. Donald Trump has picked the most radical group of potential cabinet members in American history. Fox News host Pete Hegseth for Defense Secretary, vaccine skeptic and conspiracy theorist Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for Health and Human Services Secretary, Tulsi Gabbard to head the nation's intelligence agencies, Matt Gaetz to run the Justice Department. It is truly an unbelievable group of nominees. And the question now is, will any Senate Republicans stand up to block their confirmation? It would only take 4 Senate Republicans, any 4, to block any nominee. Now, the Wall Street Journal is reporting that Republicans in the Senate see Matt Gaetz's nomination in particular as doomed. People familiar with discussions among Senate Republicans said that far more than 3 of them are prepared to vote no. Other estimates ranged from more than a dozen Republican no votes to more than 30. It won't even be close, another person told the Journal. That might be true. or that might just be how Republicans in the Senate feel today. Who can say how they might feel a few weeks from now? How much are Republicans in the Senate underestimating the weight of Donald Trump's thumb on the scale here? Mike Johnson wanted no part in the Gaetz Ethics Committee report Michigas 2 days ago, and now he's leading the campaign to make sure it never sees the light of day. As one House Republican told the Washington Post today, it's a given. Trump's going to beat us into submission. Trump has already even floated a backup plan, a plan for how he could still get the Senate to allow him whomever he wants in his cabinet, even if he doesn't have the votes. Recess appointments. Essentially, Trump would just tell the Senate to take an extended vacation, allowing him to bypass the confirmation process on the premise that the Senate is out of town. And according to the incoming Republican Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, that option is very much alive.
So you've said that you would do recess appointments if it came to that. What's the threshold for getting to that point for recess appointments?
Well, what I said is, Brett, and I think this is that all options are on the table, including recess appointments. Hopefully it doesn't get to that, but we'll find out fairly quickly.
All options are on the table. We are now facing the first real test of the Republican Party. We might even be gearing up for a low-key constitutional crisis. Congress, after all, is supposed to be an independent and co-equal branch of government. The legislative branch is supposed to check the power of the executive branch. But now, Donald Trump is looking at these Republican senators and saying, jump. And the question is, will they respond? How high?
There's no question he's the leader of our party. That means the leadership. If Donald Trump says jump 3 feet high and scratch your head, we all jump 3 feet high and scratch our heads. That's it.
Joining me now is NBC News senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor. Sahil, thank you for being here. I'm very eager to hear your latest, what you're hearing on the Hill as far as, let's start first with Speaker Johnson, who seemed to have done a U-turn on his position Wednesday. His position now seems to be firmly that he does not want this report to come out. Do you think Donald Trump had anything to do with that?
Well, Alex, there's one key to understanding everything Speaker Johnson has been doing these last few months, and that is the fact that 7 weeks from today, he's going to have to stand on the House floor and get the votes to become Speaker of the House for the next 2 years. It's a very slim Republican majority. That means he's going to need the votes of just about every one of them. And one thing he cannot afford to do is get on Donald Trump's bad side. This House Republican majority, the current one and the upcoming one, is essentially a wholly owned subsidiary of MAGA at this point. And Donald Trump can end Mike Johnson's speakership ambitions with a single tweet. Now, I don't know what happened in that conversation he had with Donald Trump, but he certainly is using the office of the Speaker to try to encourage the Ethics Committee to do something, which a couple of days ago he indicated that he did not have the power to do. So again, without going down too deep down the rabbit hole of what Mike Johnson may or may not be thinking, this is the crucial political survival question for him. He cannot get on Trump's bad side. If he's seen as failing to use his power, to advance a goal that Donald Trump wants to achieve, that could end up, working out badly for him. So that's the dilemma that he's facing right now. And he's arguing, again, in fairness to him, that this is only about precedent. He says, those situations where the Ethics Committee did release a report on a member of Congress after they resigned were wrong, and he's hanging this entire thing on. He believes deeply in this norm.
I wonder how much, I kind of see the ethics report as a litmus test for how much, if at all, the Republican Party will stand up to Donald Trump, right? If they allow this, what we are hearing is a very damaging report to be released about Donald Trump's pick for the Attorney General, that could doom his chances. Do you think at this point the Senate can muscle the House enough to get its own copy of the report, if not a public copy, released?
It's unclear, Alex. There are a couple of ways that this ethics report could be released. The most obvious, of course, is that the committee meets and decides to release it. They still could do that. There's been some chatter in the Senate, including from the Texas Republican John Cornyn, about potentially subpoenaing that report. But that got some very quick pushback from Senator Lindsey Graham, the South Carolina Republican, said he would object to any effort to subpoena it. There are a number of Republican senators who say they do want to see the report. But again, this all comes down to how aggressively they're willing to push. And this is where Senate Republicans are now. This has turned into quite a prisoner's dilemma situation between them and President Trump, because they either confirm Matt Gaetz, which, based on our reporting, most of them don't want to do. Matt Gaetz is far short of the 51 votes in the Senate that he needs if Republicans were to all vote the way they want to. So they seem to be trying to encourage Trump subtly to either withdraw the nomination or prevent it from coming to a vote, because if they vote him down, they would weaken the new president-elect of their party right out of the gate. And right now they're in the afterglow of the election. It's been literally 1 week and a few days since Donald Trump won the 2024 election. It would be highly unusual to see this kind of party division. They don't want that. They think Donald Trump doesn't want that as well. And one Republican I recently spoke to thinks Donald Trump is also testing the Senate. He likes to push the limits to see how far he can go before they push back. This is shaping up to be a crucial test of whether Senate Republicans are going to do what they deep down, many of them feel they should do, or whether they'll ultimately feel the need to submit to Trump here.
Yeah, I just real quick, Sahil. I mean, it seems like Trump has put there, I guess if there's like a get out of jail free card maybe it's the recess appointments. That way they don't actually have to vote for Matt Gaetz, but he still gets confirmed. I mean, do you think that that is ultimately a road that is looking more appealing to them?
Alex, I've asked a number of Republican senators about this, and they're not going there at this point. All of them say, even, staunch Trump allies like Senator Ron Johnson say they expect this to be done through the normal process. They expect Matt Gaetz to come through committee. Some of them are prepared to vote for Matt Gaetz. Others may not be, but they're not talking about recess appointments right now. That would be the fallback option. Republican senators are sort of saying that there might be this situation. They're conjuring up an image of Democrats trying to grind the chamber to a halt. In which case the recess appointments issue might come to the fore. Senator John Thune suggested that as well, but I've not heard a single Democrat say that they're going to do that. What they're saying is that Republicans should either reject Matt Gaetz or that Donald Trump should withdraw that nomination. So that could be the next beat if Trump persists with this. Republican senators, at least some of them, seem to want to avoid that entire conversation.
Okay, Sahil Kapoor, NBC News senior national political reporter. It's great to hear from you, Sahil. Thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you.
I want to bring into the conversation Mark Leibovich, staff writer at The Atlantic, and a man who knows a lot about servitude on Capitol Hill. Mark, Jamel Bowie, our mutual friend, has an op-ed today asking kind of the big question here, which is, will they show a backbone? If Republicans say yes to this group of Trump's picks for the cabinet or allow Trump his recess appointments, neutering the Senate's constitutional right to give advice and consent, then that means they'll say yes to anything. There's no use holding your breath here unless you want to suffocate. I completely agree with this. I think this is like the big indicator. If Matt Gaetz gets confirmed as Attorney General, it's off to the races for Donald Trump. How are you looking at this? And what's your over-under that Senate Republicans show a backbone?
Well, I mean, I think it's off to the races no matter what. I mean, I think the rule of thumb that I have followed since the beginning, really, is that when in doubt, Republicans will show no spine whatsoever. And I think that's even less likely now, given the Republicans who are no longer there. I mean, there are no Mitt Romneys, there are no Jeff Flakes around anymore. I mean, those days are so over. I mean, I think it's somewhat likely because there is so much noise around Matt Gaetz. I do buy the thing that this is a loyalty test, but I also think that the fallback options, whether it's Ken Paxton or I don't know, Matthew Whitaker, I mean, people who are out there are probably Matt Gaetz makes them all the more confirmable. And I do think that Matt Gaetz, once the incredible shock and awe of his appointment wears off and the incredible trolling value of it, is not someone who knows how to run a day-to-day operation of a huge and complicated and very chaotic agency, which will become even more so after the inevitable mass firings and mass resignations that someone coming in from that perspective is going to bring. So I don't know. I think it's I would say possible, maybe even a little bit more than possible, that this nomination doesn't go through. But I also think it portends absolutely nothing for Donald Trump being chastened over this.
Well, yeah, and I hear what you're saying about like maybe there's a glimmer of a chance that he's so out there and the backup candidates are sufficiently conservative that maybe Gaetz's nomination is killed in the crib, but that requires Donald Trump to back down. And it's really hard for me to imagine Trump, who is feeling himself, given the results of the election, it's his party that's in charge of confirming these nominees. Like, it's hard for me to imagine Donald Trump in one of the opening acts of his nascent second term saying, you know what, I'm going to give you another option. It doesn't seem Trumpian. And for anybody who's doubting how hardcore Donald Trump's fan club of one is, he said after meeting the House GOP on Wednesday, I suspect I won't be running again unless you say he's so good, we've got to figure something else. I mean, he's already, Mark, dangling a third term out there in case anybody's, considering second guessing him.
Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump believes he has every reason to feel completely uninhibited. And, look, the results of the election certainly underscore that a little bit. I think the other side of this is, will there be, a few Republicans other than the kind of usual suspects, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, who might, in this case, grow a pair of courage, and maybe be the first people out of the mark who are going to willing to defy him, whether it's Tom Tillis of North Carolina, whether it's John Cassidy of Louisiana. I mean, two people who, have had some ambivalence recently, and I think Tillis is up in a couple of years. So there is some potential out there, but look, those people are immediately going to volunteer to be the next person's suspect, potential troll victim, which is obviously not a fun place to be, and one that has driven a lot of people out of the Senate and the House, and even thinking about working for another administration.
Do you think, as you look at the landscape now, Mark, do you think that Trump is going to get all of his people? I mean, put Matt Gaetz in his own category, but even if Matt Gaetz doesn't make it, that means that Pete Hegseth is the Secretary of Defense. It means that Tulsi Gabbard is the Director of National Intelligence. I mean, that RFK Jr. is the Health and Human Services Secretary. Is he going to bat 1,000 here?
I would think it's probably unlikely that he'll bat 1,000, but I think, and whether this is strategic or not, I think the flooding of the zone this week of putting, all of these somewhat, each more outrageous than the next names out there, makes it pretty likely that there will be one, possibly two sacrificial victims of this. And, again, that implies, or that suggests that there are going to be a couple of Republicans who are willing to be out there on that. I think the larger kind of surprise I feel like about this week, if you look at the middle of the week when Gaetz was nominated, was that actually Republicans on the Hill are freaking out about this. I mean, are you kidding me? What did he say on the campaign that made you think that he might take a more moderate position, or he might take a more governing position? And look, this is something that they all campaigned for basically for the last 2 years, and this is the environment they have to govern in.
Yeah, and this is the man they chose not to impeach weeks after an insurrection he staged at their workplace. This is what you get. Enjoy the harvest of the seeds you have sown. Mark Leibovich, staff writer at The Atlantic, my friend, thank you for spending a little of your Friday night with me. Relishing the thought of President-elect Donald Trump exacting revenge on the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the now retired General Mark Milley, who has reportedly called Trump the most dangerous person to this country and a fascist. As the transition to Trump 2.0 gets underway, Trump and his allies have their sights set on retribution, and their plans are now coming into focus. The Wall Street Journal reports on the potential establishment of a warrior board to review and recommend the removal of senior officers deemed unfit for leadership. And new reporting today from Reuters reveals that Trump's team is drawing up its own list of military officers to be fired, a list that could include the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, as well as any and all officers connected to former Chairman Milley. According to one source, there's a very detailed list of everybody that was affiliated with Milley, and they will all be gone. Joining me now is Congressman Ro Khanna, Democrat of California. He sits on the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman Khanna, thank you for being here. First, just the retribution and the revenge fantasies are so transparent and so, on the front burner. What is your reaction to that, and can anything be done?
Well, here's my concern. What is Putin in Russia thinking as he's reading this? What is Xi Jinping thinking in China? This is putting our troops at risk, this kind of chaos, and threatening to hollow out the ranks of the military. And my hope is we have a chairman, Republican chairman, Mike Rogers. We have disagreements, but I respect him. I respect other people like Rob Whitman on the committee. I hope the committee is going to put the national security of this country and the strength of the Department of Defense over politics, because we need to stand up to sort of any kind of chaos that could ensue.
Well, we're hearing that, among the people that the Trump team is targeting is CQ Brown, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He started his term last October. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs usually serve 4-year terms. I mean, it would seem to have implications to oust a sitting chairman of the Joint Chiefs for no particular reason other than you don't like him. And I wonder if you think that House Republicans are going to stand in the way of that, given the general sort of climate among House Republicans as it comes to standing up to Donald Trump.
Alex, I saw your previous segment, and this is going to be a test. And actually, this test goes beyond just confirmations. This goes to the heart of our national security. I mean, this is a bipartisan committee, the Armed Services Committee. We disagree on the levels of spending, but most times we operate in a bipartisan way. I was just with the chairman in Jordan and in Saudi Arabia and Israel. It was very much on American national interest. And I would hope that my colleagues on the other side would see that just firing generals, especially at this point where we need to make sure that Ukraine just doesn't fall to Putin, would be a big mistake. I would hope they would realize that at the time the military is having a challenge recruiting, that sending a signal that you're just going to fire the Joint Chiefs is a mistake. And it's really going to be a test for the Republicans on that committee.
Can I get your thoughts on Pete Hegseth? I mean, he's out there. This is a person with no experience running a massive bureaucracy like the U.S. military. And he's suggesting that, again, CQ Brown, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was a DEI hire. This is what he said. Was he hired because of his skin color or his skill? We'll never know, but always doubt, which on its face seems unfair to CQ. But since he's made the race card one of his biggest calling cards, it doesn't really much matter. I am old enough to remember, Congressman, when the whole gist of this, being an American was putting country before party, and especially for Republicans, and especially when it came to the U.S. military. What is the net effect of having someone who may be the incoming defense secretary saying these explicitly racial and racist things about the sitting chairman of the Joint Chiefs? What does that do to morale among troops?
Well, it's so offensive because even the Republicans on the committee start out by praising the Joint Chiefs' military brilliance, his advice. You can disagree with him, but that is just insulting. And you're insulting the officers. You're insulting so many people who are enlisted. You're insulting people who are working hard to recruit new members into the military. And I hope that there are colleagues of mine who are going to speak out against that, because in the past, they have always, as you pointed out, put our troops and national security beyond politics. And this is very, very concerning. I'm also concerned. I don't care as much about every detail of his background, but I'm concerned about what that means about his ability to make sure that there's not sexual discrimination in the military. Because as you know, there have been a lot of those issues, and Jackie Spear and others worked in a bipartisan way to try to clean that up. I mean, there are a lot of questions about his leadership, and I hope Republicans will have the courage to speak out.
Does Pete Hegseth have the organizational skills to even carry out a massive purge inside the Pentagon? I mean, is that viable?
I think the reality is that he's just going to be listening to Donald Trump. And certainly I would not underestimate Donald Trump's capability to do that. And the question really becomes, will Congress stand up to the executive branch? In our Federalist Papers, we always thought that Congress would never exceed power to the executive branch because we would have too much pride in our own prerogative. Well, they didn't count on the Republican Party that is afraid of a tweet by Donald Trump. And really, this is going to be a question of whether we're going to stand up to Trump. Whoever he puts at defense is just going to be largely doing his bidding. And there were plenty of Republicans, Mike Gallagher, Mike Rogers, people I've disagreed with, who he could have chosen, who supported him. But he's chosen to pick someone who's really going to do his bidding.
Well, the framers never conceived of a man like Donald Trump, and here we are, terra incognita. Congress, with Republicans in control of the executive and legislative branches and the Supreme Court dominated by a conservative majority, the lower federal courts may be the most powerful bulwark against Trumpism in the years ahead. And before he leaves the White House, President Joe Biden may be able to do something about that by installing a record number of federal judges. Donald Trump sent the current record, confirming 234 federal judges in his first term in office. But Joe Biden is a close second, having already confirmed 215 judges, including 3 just this week. And he is not done. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer told Democrats yesterday to prepare for a final push to confirm as many judges as possible in these last few weeks before the next Congress begins. That effort got a boost yesterday when Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia signaled that he is willing to back Democrats' judicial nominees, even those without Republican support, because, as Manchin said, we are in different times right now. Yes, we are, Joe Manchin. Joining me now is Lisa Rubin, MSNBC legal correspondent and dear friend of the program. Lisa, thank you for spending some time here on your Friday night. Let me just first get to the notion of the lower courts and from your bigger, the 30,000 foot view here, how essential they can and should be in acting as a guardrail to Trump's most potentially unlawful measures during a second term.
Alex, when I think about what a Trump second term looks like, the lower courts, and particularly the district courts, are imperative that they remain guardrails. And we saw that really during Trump's first term, particularly around the Muslim ban, around the attempts to add the citizenship question by the Census Bureau. There were any number of attempts made by the Trump administration to change policies in ways that felt blatantly unconstitutional. And of course, our district courts were the first lines of defense, and in many cases issuing what then Attorney General Bill Barr complained about, nationwide injunctions that prevented those policies from taking place and being implemented.
I mean, it seems like we should hold out hope that those courts will do what they're supposed to do, regardless of who the judges are, partisan, or that they're not acting in partisan fashion, right? The reality is that, independent and apart from these, judgeships that we're talking about, the looming prospect of Trump 2.0 is shaping judges' decisions in ways not really seen before. And I'm talking particularly about January 6th defendants and those who've been convicted of crimes, right? There are 2 judges that have already delayed sentencing for January 6th rioters over the assumption that they're ultimately just going to get pardons from Donald Trump. Can you talk about how unusual that is for judges to preemptively assume it's pointless to sentence someone convicted of a crime?
I'm not really aware of any other analog, but before we condemn those judges and say that they're just throwing up their hands and feeling helpless, I want to provide a counter view about what might be going through their minds. In the District of Columbia, where all of these cases are situated, the courts have been entirely overwhelmed by January 6th and the caseload that it has brought upon these judges. And that means for other litigants, they are having to wait longer to have motions disposed of or to go to trial. It has literally clogged up the federal courts in D.C. So if I'm a judge thinking through what my caseload looks like, who else is waiting for trial, I might not want to use judicial resources right now on a case where I know the defendant is going to get pardoned, particularly if it means delaying justice for someone else, and if it means calling in jurors whose efforts are only going to be futile several weeks to months from now. Think about how that affects potential jurors out there in D.C. to see 12 of their peers stand in judgment of someone only to have it wiped clean later. Doesn't really inspire confidence in the concept of jury service, which, as you and I know, next to voting, is one of the most elemental things about our democracy.
Yeah, I kind of wonder how broad the scope of pardons is going to be. Donald Trump has expressed a zeal for getting people off the hook, but at the same time, I think in an interview with Time magazine in April, Trump said, in the way that only Trump can, if somebody was evil and bad, I would look at that case differently. I mean, it's hard to expect the naturally unexpected whims of Donald Trump, Lisa, but would you expect that someone like Enrique Tarrio is going to get off the hook here? I mean, how ambitious do you think the Trump Justice Department or Trump can be in terms of issuing these pardons?
Well, look, Alex, my mantra for the next 4 years and counting is expect the unexpected. I don't put anything past people, whether it's through a pardon or not.
As we talk about Trump escaping accountability for his potentially criminal actions, and we talk about his allies getting pardons, there's one guy that can't seem to get off the hook, and that person is Rudy Giuliani, Lisa. He had to do some things today as part of his defamation suit. Can you talk a little bit more about how Rudy is paying the piper?
So Rudy, for the first time, has officially turned over some, but not all of the property that he's been ordered by a Manhattan federal court judge to turn over to Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. They are the two Georgia election workers that he defamed when he accused them of essentially passing a thumb drive full of ballot information back between them. It turned out to be a ginger mint, and he ruined their lives in the process. And he now owes them $148 million per a jury verdict in D.C. Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss then sued Rudy Giuliani here in Manhattan to recover some of what he owes them. And today, he handed over to them his vintage Mercedes-Benz. It's a 1980s Benz, originally driven by the actress Lauren Bacall, and 2 watches. That's a start, but not even a considerable dent in what he owes them. I should note that perhaps the most valuable thing Rudy Giuliani has is his Manhattan apartment. And as far as we know, Alex, that is not yet in the women's possession.
Let's just focus for the moment, in this climate, on the fact that Rudy Giuliani had to hand over a vintage Mercedes-Benz, a watch, and a ring to Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. There is just the beginning of a little justice in that case. Lisa Rubin, thank you for making that. Took place before Trump's first term ever began. And now it's about to happen again. Donald Trump is on the verge of once again sweeping in and taking all the credit for the economic stewardship of his Democratic predecessor. Put a finer point on this. Take a look at the unemployment rate for the last 3 presidents. When Barack Obama took office at the height of the financial crisis in January of 2009, the unemployment rate was 7.8%. When Obama left office in January of 2017, the unemployment rate had been cut nearly in half and was just 4.7%. Donald Trump then took credit for a booming job market right up until the country was hit by a global pandemic. And Trump's colossal mismanagement of that crisis caused the unemployment rate to skyrocket once again. When Trump left office, the unemployment rate was back up to 6.4%. Joe Biden then managed to bring unemployment back down to 4.1%, where it sits today, as Donald Trump is set to retake power. It's a similar story with inflation, which spiked after the pandemic all across the globe. President Biden actually positioned the U.S. as a global leader in bringing down inflation, taking it from 9.1% in June of 2022 to just 2.6% today. Republicans taking credit for Democratic economies is not really anything all that new. As my friend and colleague Steve Bannon has pointed out before, over the last 35 years, employers have added roughly 51 million jobs in the United States. And 50 million of them, as in 98%, have been created during Democratic administrations. But Donald Trump's cynicism, self-aggrandizement, and mendacity make him uniquely suited to take credit for someone else's work. In fact, he's already begun.
And we had 3 or 4 of the highest, I guess almost every single day we set new records in the stock market. We set new records economically. We're doing it. Now, the only thing is, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important, maybe you should pass a bill. You have to start my term from November 5th, okay? Or November 6th if you want. November 5th, because the market's gone through the roof.
That was Donald Trump last night saying he wants credit for the stock market even before his term begins. The challenge for Democrats over these next 4 years will be administration, NOAA, announced that there is a greater than 99% chance that this year, 2024, will be the hottest year on record. It is a fitting backdrop as leaders from nearly 200 countries are meeting right now in Baku, Azerbaijan at the United Nations Annual Summit on Climate Change, which is known as COP29. As has happened before, COP29 has been the target of protests and criticisms for lacking the urgency required to confront what is the most existential threat of our time. But this year, there is particular urgency given the election of Donald Trump, a man who not only has denied the existence of climate change, but also promised to reverse any and all progress that has been made to reduce fossil fuel emissions. Joining me now is David Wallace Wells, an opinion writer at the New York Times and author of The Uninhabitable Earth, Life After Warming. David, thanks for being here. This week we learned that Trump's going to be appointing is aiming to appoint Doug Burgum.
số 5 đến hàng số 9, mỗi hàng các bạn sẽ bóc cho mình 32